All right, welcome back. So we left off on in 1946. We had just previously discussed Keenan's long telegram, the idea of containment. But continuing on with 1946, some other things happened. So to get rid of tariffs, to assist in trade in Geneva, Switzerland, we signed a general agreement on trades and tariffs, also known as GATT. So not like the gun in your waistband, a GATT. But that's what it stands for. General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs. So this did reduce or eliminate an awful lot of tariffs throughout the world. This really helped, assisted with trade post-World War II. 9 more rounds of agreements. Ended up being 123 nations in total agreeing to this. This also led to the WTO, also known as the World Trade Organization. So if competing nations have an issue with different trade disputes, they come in and they try to mediate the trade disputes. Okay, so it's always good to have a mediator between nations, if at all possible. All right, Truman Doctrine. So we did talk about this a little bit in class already via our starters. Kind of important to know how we deal in foreign affairs. So we talked a little bit about Washington's farewell address, all the different policies. So if we talk about big stick policy, dollar diplomacy, the other diplomacies earlier in the year, this is what we're looking at now, the Truman Doctrine. So 1947, Truman rolls out with this idea of the Truman Doctrine. To support free people who are resisting subjugation by armed minorities, typically communist minorities. And in a lot of cases, that wasn't necessarily the minority. In a lot of these communist revolutions, usually when we see communist revolutions, it's from the bottom up, and of course the bottom is your majority. So not exactly always necessarily true. So Truman Doctrine, this is the passing of the torch from the British Imperial Empire over to the United States. Greece is having difficulties, Greece and Turkey is having difficulties with communist rebellions. So British, they're hurting after World War II, and they don't really want to help the Greeks and the Turks out because they have their own issues. So they ask for U.S. aid. So we, of course, go over there, we help them out, and it'd be pretty sad if the very beginnings of democracy, or what a lot of people feel are the beginnings of democracy, the Greek republics fall to communism. That would look really, really bad on democracy. So we don't want to see Greece go down in flames of communism. Because we now have the Truman Doctrine, the Monroe Doctrine is no longer there. Okay, so this completely ends this idea of isolationism of the United States in the Western Hemisphere. We're now going to progress globally. All right, so this is what the Truman Doctrine is all about. Helping around the globe. This also led to the idea of the domino theory, also a part of containment. So, for example, if we look at Korea, one of the reasons for getting involved in Korea and Vietnam, we don't want to see any other countries in that area falling like dominoes. So first you get one domino to fall and all the rest after that. So we don't want to see that, because that's kind of what we saw in Russia and also Eastern Europe, along with China, all these other countries falling, if you will, to communism. So this helped establish NATO. We wanted to prop up these other governments so they did not also fall to communism in Western Europe. So if we look at France, Italy, France being a very socialistic type country, yet at the same time they do like their democracy, it may have been a pretty good chance that France would have ended up a communist country if we did not assist them post-World War II through a variety of means. Not just NATO, but also the Marshall Plan, which we'll talk about here in a moment. With the establishment of NATO, a lot of people will argue, this was a courageous commitment by the U.S., and it was really worth the billions and billions, trillions of dollars that we spent during the Cold War to stop Soviet aggression, Soviet expansion, communist expansion. Others will say it was unnecessary. There was no real threats. You know, if you put the fear in people, everybody has a reason to fear the same thing. Everybody's on the same page, and everybody is happy. A lot of negative long-term consequences because, of course, we're using a lot of resources in order to combat this Soviet aggression. So I was talking about the Marshall Plan a little bit earlier. Because of the Lend-Lease Act was up after World War II, General Marshall really felt that we needed to help prop up, like I was saying earlier, these different governments in Western Europe. They needed aid. They weren't doing too well. We want to make sure that they did not go towards communism because communism looks good if your country isn't doing well. So we want to definitely make sure we are assisting them. So two main motives. Helping Europe to recover economically, what helps our market. So we have somewhere to sell our stuff. Remember, the whole idea of America jumping on the imperialism bandwagon is that we needed people to buy our stuff. Because we're good at making stuff now. Whether it be toasters or cars or whatever, Wisconsin cheese. We want to sell our stuff, okay? A prosperous Europe is better off to resist the spread of communism. And that has a lot to do with it. You know, the money, I've used that term before, money makes the world go round. So it's good for economy, but it also helps slow or stop the spread of communism. Now, because of the Marshall Plan, we end up loaning European nations, over 17 of them, up to $13 billion in a matter of 4 years. So if we look at this little map right here, it kind of shows the lion's share: Great Britain, West Germany, France, a good chunk to Italy also. Good chance that France and Italy, you know, was really saved from communism because, of course, they were not doing well. They weren't doing well at all post World War II. They took a brunt of a lot of it. Same thing with Great Britain and West Germany. That's why one of the reasons why we see so much money going towards there, because you need to rebuild. It's after a war, it's post World War II, so a lot of rebuilding is going to take place. We see Czechoslovakia, you know, that's one of the first places, or the second place, I should say, Germany rolled into during World War II or beginnings of World War II, and, you know, they turned to communism also. So part of that iron, or behind that Iron Curtain, also known as the Eastern Bloc. So the Marshall Plan is really criticized by Congress. You know, it's expensive. These are our tax dollars. European economists didn't like it also. It would slow the transition of free markets. It would hide failed socialist policies that they're trying to implement. You know, a lot of people say socialism is an evil thing. But in reality, we have social programs in our country. So the word socialism shouldn't be a scary word. It's used all the time. So cartoon, really cool cartoon. It really talks about what we're discussing here. So the American taxpayer trying to helping this huge gangly creature along, also known as Europe post World War II. You know, keep pumping. Let's go. Let's help you out. Well, if you never take off the training wheels, or if you hold on forever, you know, what's going to happen? You know, sink or swim type mentality. A lot of congressmen wanted to see, or the European economists also wanted to see this also, as well. Plans criticized by the USSR, of course, also. They're trying to say, you know, the U.S. is controlling the European powers. If you give them money, of course, you have a little bit of say in what they do with that money. So yeah, they can criticize. Kind of makes sense. So quote right here: "It is becoming more and more evident the implementation of the Marshall Plan will mean placing European countries under the economic and political control of the United States." So it makes sense. Of course, they're going to criticize us. Now, even though they're criticizing us, at the same time, they do the same thing with the Eastern Bloc countries. So those countries behind the Iron Curtain. So initially it's called the Molotov Plan. Later it's called Comecon. And not the comic thing that's down in San Diego every year. So it's very similar to the Marshall Plan, offering aid to Poland, Czechoslovakia, some of the other anti-Soviet, the other Eastern Bloc countries. The Soviets are accusing the U.S. of attempting to create an anti-Soviet bloc in Europe. Well, yeah, we kind of are. We don't want communism to spread, so good criticism, I guess, or good accusation. All right, so coming along to 1947, creation of the CIA. It was called something previously prior to the CIA, OSS, the Office of Strategic Services. So those of you who are Marvel fans, Captain America was a part of the OSS. Just a little cool trivia there for you. National Security Council, the NSC, to advise and assist the President on national security and foreign policies. We're much more involved in foreign affairs now, so we need a council to advise the President. The President isn't going to be aware of everything. Remember, it's a head of state. They can't know everything that's going on all at once, so you definitely need people to help support you. The War Department now becomes the Department of Defense. So, I mean, if you just look at the words themselves, the War Department, so you would think that department's only going to be active in a time of war. However, the Department of Defense, this is ongoing. This is something that is always going to be concerning. Okay. The Berlin Blockade. So, 1948. The Soviet Union decides to basically cut off. We had a road that went from West Germany to Berlin. That road, that railroad as well, just completely gets cut off to Berlin. Berlin is or was the capital of Germany. Excuse me. And we had control of West Berlin. Now, if you look at the map, Berlin is way into East Germany territory. So the Soviets didn't really like that we were so far into basically their territory. So it's somewhat understandable that they cut this off, yet at the same time, that was a part of the agreement when we divided up Germany, that we would have a portion of that capital. So West Germany was, it's not a possession of ours per se, but, we controlled it. So they cut this off. Not very cordial of them to do. So in response, we say, okay, fine. So we send a huge response of airlifting all the necessary supplies for Western Berlin. Typically you don't want to fly your aircraft into enemy territory because it risks the chance of getting shot down. But that didn't happen, okay? Very well could have happened, but we're kind of calling them on their bluff. Remember, if we look at Keenan's long telegram, it basically says the Soviets like to bluff, so call them on it every single time. And, well, Berlin blockade, we did. Eventually, the Russians do lift the blockade. No longer do we need to airlift, but really the result of this is the tensions it caused. We were very, very upset that they cut us off to our personnel. We had our personnel in East Berlin, not just East Berliners. Excuse me, West Berliners. So we had our personnel. So you're just cutting us off from our people. Not cool at all. So we definitely called them on that. But this ends up being a place of contention throughout the Cold War, and it makes it easy for us to kind of like hop into their territory anyways. So they really didn't like that idea. So no compromise over Germany is going to be possible after this. It would remain divided, East and West Germany, until the collapse of Eastern Europe communist regimes in 1989. So this continues. For the entire Cold War, Berlin is separated.